home and abroad, on our agriculture, our economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world-class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station.
Good evening and a very, very warm welcome to you in Radioland. Let me also say a very good evening to all of you who are with us on Facebook and on Twitter and on YouTube. You can get us there at Q95 FM Radio. Please like our pages, share the live, and get the latest breaking news and happenings as it happens only on Q95, the big station. So I'm your host, Sheridan Gregoire. This is the Global View on Q. It's Tuesday, 4th October, and it's the 40th Tuesday of 2022, and it's now just about 8:07 p.m. at Q95. Sorry to be a few minutes late. But my distinguished guest tonight are Attorney Gabriel Christian, political scientist Dr. Dion George, and sociologist Mr. Simeon Joseph. They need no introduction, absolutely, as each of them in their own rights is a household name already. We're continuing to move towards reviving the spirit of graciousness, of love, of peace and prosperity and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean people. Our topic tonight, democracy and democratic leadership in Dominica, and the resignation of leaders as a mark of good democratic leadership practice. We encourage Dominicans to understand that when a good political leader resigns, it is a mark of virtue and wise democratic ethics. Lennox Linton has resigned from his party with immediate effect on 30th September 2022. Others must now step up and answer the call to duty. Lennox deserves a very warm salute for the meritorious service he has rendered to the cause of Dominica's democracy. He is a national hero. I have no doubt that he will step up and unify his party under its new political leader to ensure that wise heads counsel that everyone remains focused on ensuring that tyranny does not loot Dominica, if that is happening at all, and provide a united front for all democracy-loving Dominicans to remove any cancer that may form on the land. So we look at the current state of Dominica's democratic leadership and what it can truly become with good governance and sound management of its natural and human resources, with principles like work, wages, and wealth for every Dominican at the core of proper people-centered planning. So here are a few talking points in which I hope my illustrious guests will immerse themselves completely tonight. Attorney Gabriel Christian, political scientist Dr. Dion George, sociologist Mr. Simeon Joseph, hopefully will help us unravel some of the answers to these major issues and find solutions for the way forward for Dominica. They will discuss the good, the bad, the ugly, and the dangerous with no anger, no malice, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness, just simply bringing back civility, a caring society, and progressive governance, recognizing, of course, the imperative for the true resilience and sustainability of our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. Somebody's mic is open. I hope that you can close it so we can cut back some of the little feedback we heard at the back. So please shut your mics, mute your mics rather. Your voices at home and abroad always takes priority. So please call in and tell us what you think of the current state of Dominica's democracy and economy, the way it was, the way it is now, and what it can be, as I said, with good governance and management of its natural resources. We feel for our hardworking Roseau Bayfront vendors, who I understand are very concerned about their possible removal from their livelihoods at their current location at this time. We hope this matter can be resolved very soon because these are very hard-working women who have toiled very hard and used the meager resources from their sales to put their children through school, to take care of their families. So we wish them well and we hope that the powers that be will enter into their consideration and make sure that they can continue their livelihoods. Meantime, Linton's resignation has presented us with a great opportunity to examine the standard of living and the quality of life of ordinary men, women, and children, and the elderly in Dominica. And if there is any level of poverty and mendicancy that may exist in Dominica at present, every effort should be made to wipe that out as soon as possible. So stay with us in this space for another great debate. Get the answers to your questions. Be part of the solution wherever you are in Dominica, in the region, and globally. Please join this conversation on the Global View on Q and have your say as you do every time we're here on a Tuesday with me, Mr. G, only on Q95, the big station. But as usual, as before we get started, we want to send a huge shout out, hugs, much love and appreciation, and a big thank you, of course, to our healthcare providers and frontline workers. They continue doing their best to keep us safe, and so we're very happy to have them, and we wish them Godspeed. So happy to have you with us tonight, wherever you are. We welcome you warmly and embrace you in every nook and cranny, in every village, every community in Dominica, in the region, and globally. Thank you again, Sherwin, keeping us on the air in crystal clear liquid stereo. Thank you, DJ Shan, on the console at Q95 tonight, directing the traffic. He will direct your calls to us a little later. Remember Lambi and extend well wishes to him for a speedy recovery. We make the people's voice a priority tonight. We will take your calls. But let's get started. And I want to go first to the illustrious attorney Gabriel Christian to give us a situation analysis, so to speak, as to what he sees as taking place in Dominica in the context of our topic tonight, democratic leadership in Dominica, and resignation as a mark of democratic leadership, and encouragement, of course, to Dominicans to understand that when a good political leader resigns, it is a mark of civic virtue and wise democratic ethics. Let me yield to you now, Attorney Gabriel Christian.
Blessed good evening to you, Brother Sheridan. Blessed good evening to you, Brother Simeon Joseph. Seeing you on reminds me of those days back at the grammar school when hope was not forlorn. Blessed good evening to you, Brother Dion. You always remind me of your illustrious father, Sergeant George of the Defense Force. I'm always reminded of him. And a blessed good evening to the young brother who's replaced Brother Lambi at the Master Control. Thank you for your service. And I want to send a prayer of comfort and for recovery of Brother Lambi, who's been with us many a night as we seek to expand the circumference of knowledge of all Dominicans at home and abroad. Brother Sheridan, I want to take a moment as a member of the Nature Island Civil Liberties Foundation, which is not a political party, which if tomorrow the United Workers' Party were in government and was signing over a $1.6 billion contract for an airport without public tender, we would speak out against it. If tomorrow someone who is not a member of parliament, who is not a member of the civil service, who is not under the general orders, who has not sworn any allegiance to our country, was given $4.6 billion to manage overseas, would speak out against it. And the reason we set up the Civil Liberties Foundation is because no matter what government is in power, there must be civic-minded government inclined and democracy-inclined people who believe in good governance, who must stand up and say, this is right, and we support it, and this is wrong, and we condemn it. And so let me say at this time how pleased I am to have been associated with, not as a member of a political party, but as a civic-minded, democracy-loving Dominican, the leadership of Lennox Linton, who, in our own modest way, we sought to support on three fronts. One, integrity in governance. It was Lennox Linton who revealed to the world things we had already known, but it was not known outside Dominica, the habit of our government in placing, that habit was placing the prized badge of citizenship or passport, diplomatic passports, in the hands of criminals who were later arrested. It was Lennox Linton who, several years ago, in the infamous Bin Bobal, through his intrepid efforts and his investigatory skill, was able to catch elements of our government red-handed in the fleecing of our treasury when they paid an amount in excess of 500% over market price for garbage bins from an obscure company in the misty woods of Pennsylvania. That was Lennox Linton. And I'm reliably informed, and if in fact I'm incorrect, I'd like someone to call in to correct me, that when they were caught, not because of the Director of Audit's work, by the way, but because of the work of civic-minded Dominicans in the civil service, aiding the leader of the opposition, the government was heard to say, oh, it was a mistake, and they made efforts to have the money be returned to the Treasury. Is that correct? Is that what happened in Dominica?
Yeah. That is my understanding.
Can any Dominican or anyone who's in reach of my voice give me another instance in Dominican history or in the history of the English-speaking Caribbean where a leader of the opposition, not the Director of Audit, mind you, was able to get the government to admit their error or their malintent and to repay the treasury of the country that he served as leader of the opposition? There are many other things I can say about his stewardship, but the reality is there came a time when Mr. Linton, as a free citizen, and I hope we can still maintain our freedom in Dominica to do that which we believe is in our best interest and the national interest, sought to step down from his position as leader of the United Workers' Party, retaining his position as a parliamentarian, which he did not resign from, and retaining his position, I believe, as leader of the opposition, which he should not resign from. And I believe that is indicative of a democratic spirit, that if one feels that one has done his or her best, and one feels that one ought to make way for others, that you not stay there in perpetuity, as some leaders, have been heard to say that their daughter or their son will, in fact, succeed them. So we're now like Syria, where Bashar Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, was there, and now he is gone. His son is now there as president, and now you hear we are in diplomatic relationships with that dictator, and then you hear it was a mistake. We didn't intend to have diplomatic relations, and it was the fault of the ambassador to the United Nations. And of course, we now see the confusion. We now see the backstabbing. We now see the finger pointing. Let us, as civic-minded Dominicans, not be engaged in that. Let us keep our eyes, as I say, on the prize. What is the prize? Our country and its dignity, rule of law, democracy, good governance. Those aspects of our society were not under the command and control of Lennox Linton. He tried valiantly as leader of the opposition, nor were they under the control of Dion George or Mr. Simeon Joseph or the United Workers' Party or Sheridan Gregoire. At all times relevant, the ship of state is being guided by Roosevelt Skerritt, who is the prime minister and who's charged with the responsibility to respect our Constitution, to respect rule of law, to respect the Finance Act that says that monies that are belonging to the government of Dominica ought to be in the consolidated fund, to respect the Procurement Act that says any significant public works or any significant government procurement ought to be done in compliance with the Procurement Act. In 1824, there was a newspaper which on its front cover had advertisements for runaway slaves. I was shown that newspaper by a Dominican businesswoman in Roseau. I wouldn't call her name, but she comes from a distinguished Dominican family. And she had a folio with all newspapers. And on the front, and I've said it before on this program, on the front cover of that newspaper of July 12, 1824, before the abolition of slavery, bakers in Roseau advised, the general public, in particular bakers of Roseau advised, that the British Army barracks at Mont Bruce is advertising to those bakers. They need to supply bread to the troops. And all tenders are invited to be provided to the provost marshal at governor's house. So under the colonial regime, for the baking of bread for the troops at Monbruce, we're issuing tender in the public newspaper, something I would see as a child in the Chronicle and in the Herald and in the Star. And today, as an independent nation, we have eviscerated those principles of good governance that obtained as way back as 1824. And we are asked to celebrate independence in November. What a farce. What a shame. What a sad commentary that we as an independent nation have been overtaken by a one-party state culture and one man. And so while we salute Lennox Linton for his marvelous tenure, he did his best, he did not win. Or let's say he was made to lose elections, or the party was made to lose elections, because we know that people were paid to come down and vote. They were given gratuity, you see. They were brought in by plane load, you see, to pervert the course of election. We know people were also given gratuity in way of the shows that they were allowed to have for free, where those same shows in the United States is $50 and $60 and $100 a head. But they were given that entertainment value for free, obviously not because it was Father Christmas performing in red, but because it was intended as a, what you call, inducement for a vote, something that is in violation of our electoral laws. So let us as a people, therefore, compliment civic-minded people like Mr. Linton, who put himself up for office, a great sacrifice to himself and to his family. And surely we send a bouquet of roses to you this time, and your children and your other members of your family. You have to address issues like abuse as your facial features and the color of your skin. And let's be blunt, Dominicans have a reckoning to deal with. We're talking in Dominica, and there are people talking about reparations from Britain on the other side. And they are involved in racial prejudice against people from Marigot because of the color of their skin. Gabriel Christian said so. And he's saying so tonight.
That's true.
That's what's happening in the party of Edward Oliver LeBlanc and Emmanuel Christopher LeBlanc. That is the reality today in Dominica, that Black people and Black people's children are criticized because of the color of their skin and their looks, you see, when they stand up for office. This is the kind of miseducation of the Negroes that we have going on in our country. Shame on you, all of you, on the side of a party which once stood for the right of Kalinago people and African descended people to walk proudly in their land. And you put the false dashiki on and you talk about reparations. You shouldn't be looking to Queen Elizabeth and what she should do. The lady, let her rest in peace. Is it Queen Elizabeth that allowed us to give a $1.6 billion project to a foreigner, some Lebanese in the Middle East without tender? Was that Queen Elizabeth's fault? Was that British colonialism that allowed for us to steal elections and import people to vote in violation of our laws? Was that British colonialism that allowed us to give contracts to our friends and to sell passports to criminals and banditti and mafiosi? So we need to get a life in Dominica and get serious in Dominica and call things for what they are and be honest people, honest with ourselves, honest with our utterances, honest with our thoughts. And let's look within to the internal rot, the cancer that's eating away at the body politic of our country, and stop pointing fingers at events 200 years ago that we seek reparative justice for, supposedly, when the monies that we have right now that belong to the people of Dominica cannot be found, according to one Zampoli, who was supposedly an ambassador. I am afraid, this is his word, in a pleading in the Southern District of New York, that my share of the funds will disappear in the Dominican Bank in Switzerland. Mr. Prime Minister, tell us this evening, when was the Dominican Bank in Switzerland set up? By whom was it set up? How much is in it? And who has the signing authority on the checking account? We need to know those things. So we thank Mr. Linton. We thank all those in NJAM, the Freedom Party, and no party at all who've raised their voices in rightful indignation at the way our country has been ruined, where we have a one-party culture that's intolerant, that has almost the entire opposition under indictment for trying to overthrow the government with a song truck. That is where we are in 2022. after independence. Let us not blame Britain and colonialism and slavery for the slavery we've imposed on our own people. Thank you very much.
Well, and thank you for your opening remarks there, Gable. As I go over to Dr. Dion George, I mean, we have to take note of some of the comments that you made, and I'm sure they will come back in the substance of the discussion a little later on, Gable, because very, very interesting comments and observations. And you give us some very pointed reminders of some of the issues that we're concerned about in our democracy, or very young fledgling democracy. But as we look at the whole question of leadership and democracy tonight, and as we use the opportunity of Lennox Linton's resignation as a reminder that our democracy is fragile and we want to go back and revisit it and see how it can work better than it's working now, one or two questions I want to ask there as Dion George comes in, because as a political scientist, I'm sure that he will address the question of leadership and the other things that are attendant things. But the question is, and to you, our listeners out there on Facebook, we will acknowledge you in a little bit later on, because I noticed quite a few are already on Facebook and making some greetings and some comments. We appreciate you. So here are a couple of questions I just want to put in your minds, our listeners tonight, and then Dion George and Simeon and also Gable. What is the impact of Lennox Linton's resignation and his parting words on his party's cohesiveness or its unity? Because we want to ensure that the democracy has a good, strong government that's working in the interest of the people, and the opposition is also strong, that can keep the governance on its toes to ensure that it is working for the ordinary man and woman. So Linton's resignation now has put that spotlight on the performance and possibly on undemocratic principles of the DLP administration. We need to look at that in a democracy. What is the impact of Linton's resignation on his party's loyal supporters? Will Linton supporters put loyalty to him first, or to party first, or to country first? Is Linton himself prepared to work toward the full unification of his party? He deserves, obviously, as we said before, a warm salutation for his steadfast, meritorious service for the causes of democracy. He is, in fact, a hero. But then we must look at the challenges that are existing now, the challenges of effecting a smooth leadership succession and transition within the United Workers' Party, which is the major opposition party in Dominica at this time. And in fact, Linton is and is remaining as the leader of the opposition in Parliament. Has the UWP learned lessons from the DFP and from the DLP, or will they repeat the mistakes of the past? Will the new UWP leader be able to stop the stealing of elections and the persecution of UWP supporters? Good questions, right? Which leader will best offer? Which emerging new leader will best offer an alternative to the ongoing impoverishment of Dominica? Which leader will best stop the bleeding of members from the UWP and embrace everyone in a big tent, a new big tent, open arms? Is the UWP now mature enough to ensure that they unify the party and the country to advance Dominica's democracy and the prosperity of the people? I'm just going to stop at those few questions. I have a few more later on that I will put on the table. But the question is, will we see sometime within the next few days a press conference by the United Workers' Party if the party's interim leader, who was in fact the deputy political leader, and the party's president and the executives and Mr. Lennox Linton sitting right between them, that they come out and face the public and say, here we are, united, ready to roll. And to hear Mr. Linton say that I certainly am still a member of my party, and I plan to continue ensuring that my party is unified and that I pledge my support to whatever new leader is coming in. In fact, I want to see that leader do well and to continue the work that I started. Will we see something like that? I hope so, because this is the essence of maturity, right? Dr. Dion George, you are the political scientist, not me. I'm a guy who didn't take much schooling. help us out with some of those and with the leadership question and the whole notion of democracy. Give us some of your wisdom on that, Dr. Dion George.
Mr. Gregoire, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. Good evening to my panelists, Mr. Gabriel Christian, my good friend, Simeon Joseph. And of course, I want to support Gabriel in remembering Lambi. And so we want to share our hearts and our prayers to him for his recovery. Of course, I want to welcome the young man and thank you, sir, for your service. And say a loud shout out to the people of Salisbury, to the people of Dominica. But I have a very beautiful sister who told me that I don't call her name. Her name is Lista George, and she's from New York. And she wants me to tell her good night. Lista, I love you. I really do love you. But tonight we are discussing a very salient issue. And of course, we are talking about democracy, first of all. And I think this discussion has been sensitized by the retirement of a major political party in Dominica. And so I think it gives us an opportunity to talk about transformation and development in transformation. I think it gives us an opportunity to talk about the whole idea of leadership. I think it gives us an opportunity to talk about what is the real meaning of democracy for Dominica. And so with that being said, just allow me to invite, I guess, the Holy Spirit, and that this contribution would be one that is meaningful. And so as a political scientist, Mr. Gregoire, I cannot approach this topic from a tangential or parochial viewpoint. Rather, I think it must be somewhat holistic. And so with that being said, I want to bring up some questions. So why are we discussing that? Why are we having discussion tonight? Is leadership or the style of leadership important? And if so, why? And what impact does leadership has on a country? And so with that being said, just allow me for 30 seconds to read a scripture from the Gospel of Mark. It's Mark chapter 10, verse 35 to 45. And it says this: James and John, the son of Zebedee, came to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." Jesus replied, he says, "What do you want me to do for you?" They said, "Grant that when you are in your glory, that one of us will sit at your right and the other would sit at your left." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking." The point there is that they wanted big position. They wanted to be the leaders. They wanted to be in position next to the leader. Let me just continue quickly. "Can you drink the cup that I drink?" Jesus asked them. They said, "Yes, we can." Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism that I was baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right or at my left is not mine to give, but is for those for whom which has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, remember it's 12 disciples. So when the 10 heard this, they said to them, "You know that those who are recognizing as rulers of the Gentiles are lord over them, and their great ones make them authority over them. Be felt. But it shall not be so among you. Rather, whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be the slave of all." The word of the Lord. And that's the first thing I just want to say before I get into what I have prepared. But even before I get into it, there is a very one sentence I would take from Judges chapter 8. It says, Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, my son. I will not rule over you. The Lord is the one who rule over you." Even in Daniel chapter 2, it says, He changes times and season. He removes kings and set up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. My dear friends, tonight we are discussing a very important thing. Democracy is at hand. And so what is democracy? Of course, in many previous shows, we have decided that there is the rule of law, there is term of limits, there is participation of the public, etc., etc. Let me get to the facts. Democracy for Dominica. I think what the leader of the opposition did is the epiphany of what democracy is. It is the epiphany of what democracy is. And so why do I say that? Well, as a political scientist, we all know how leaders, whether you are in the incumbent or whether you're in the opposition, can change leadership. You could be recalled, you could resign, you could be voted out, or you could be deceased. God forbid that you're not deceased. And so Dominica is not a unique place, as in what is happening is the only time that has ever happened. And the only reason I'm mentioning that is because I heard on some programs on the radio, folks are perturbed, some folks are angry, some folks are disappointed, some folks may feel that the opposition leader was vilified, perhaps marginalized, and treated with disrespect. But I believe the leader made a decision. And from my understanding, now I could be wrong, but from my understanding, that was an independent decision that he made with his own conscience. And so other countries who are similar to Dominica includes, for example, the Netherlands, where the leader of the party is the most senior politician within the political party, and the leaders outwardly act as a figurehead, as the main representative of the party. And if there is an election, he becomes the party leader. Now, importantly, that leader could still be a member of the government, as Mr. Lennox Linton still is. And that leader in the Netherlands, and as in Dominica, could still be the MP, the parliamentary representative for his constituency, as the Honorable Lennox Linton still is. And so we have to take this on a very holistic way. And of course, it's emotional. He has been there perhaps maybe 8 or 10 years, thereabout, and really consider what has happened. Now, what I will say is this: credit must be given to him for his service, for being vilified, for being marginalized, for being put into a certain box, being accused of things that perhaps he's innocent of, but for all the sacrifice he has made. And on that note, I want to give thanks to his family and to his wife and his entire family for the sacrifices that he has made for the Dominican people. When he gave his resignation letter, it was a statesman letter. I think not once I heard him accused anyone directly, at least, of sabotage. And I think he still gave his love for the country. And so he left as a national statue. And so we must recognize that. But I say this in a global context as well. And that's really good, because consider, for example, David Cameron, for those of you who remember, the former Prime Minister of England. Do you know that when they had Brexit, when England was thinking of leaving Europe, do you know what David Cameron said? David Cameron said, if the referendum goes in favor of Brexit, he will leave the prime ministership. Interestingly, one of the members on the other side told him, well, I understand Chelsea, that's the soccer team, is looking for a new manager. So you better get a new job, because you better believe the referendum will go in favor for Brexit. And David Cameron said, no problem. Because you know why? He stood on principle. And something tells me Mr. Linton stands on principle. Again, not just David Cameron or Lennox Linton, but even Nelson Mandela. And people say Lennox Linton has been through a lot. Nelson Mandela took 27 years in Robben Island in South Africa, in prison. Yes, after he got his redemption, and yes, after he became the president, but he never held on to power. You know what he said? He think he did what he had to do. He fought for a good cause. He was labeled a terrorist. But after he said Africa is for Africans, for all of us, and Africa became what it became, the man resigned. And so I want to just give credence to what is happening there. And I do not want to get into infighting and accusation without facts. I want to have a positive outlook for change. I want to have a positive outlook for togetherness, the whole sense of a collective effort for what we are working toward. And so before I yield, there's just one other thing I would like to mention, and then I can revisit other things later. And that is, how can we analyze the impact of leadership? Interestingly, this was one of the questions that Mr. Sheridan Gregoire asked. What is the impact of a leader? What is the impact of the resignation of a leader? And my answer to you is, I can make excuses and say sorry, but it's really textbook. There are three main areas in political science that people look at. The first one is looking at the political institutions of that state, of that country. The second is looking at when there are constraints that limit that particular individual in that office. And the third is when there are ambiguous or unusual circumstances happening during the era of that particular individual. And so let's look at Dominica on the first agenda, political institution. We have a government. Are the elections fair? So someone might want to evaluate the leader who just resigned and say, oh, he failed after 2 terms or after several years. What have the UWP achieved? What could they have achieved? Were there constraints? Were there foul play? Was the elections fair? One can consider, for example, that in tight circumstances, I could just mention it as an example. George Bush, Republican, yeah. Some folks said he did not do well, but there are those who argue that he faced what? Katrina. He faced what? 9/11. He had the Iraq War. So there are folks who analyze this thing, and they are saying that there are certain things that really matters during the time of the political leadership. So that's number one. The other thing is, are there constraints? Consider, for example, a leader in power for 20 years. We, in the initial part of this discussion, said that we are looking at some tenets of democracy. Please, my dear friends and my colleagues on the panel, if someone is in power for 20 years, 25 years, does that spells democracy? Is it not fair in any healthy democracy based on what is the accepted definition of what is democracy, that there should be some term limits? What prevents us from having these electoral fixes that would ensure that? Now, don't get me wrong. I love Dominica from the soul of my being. America has its own problems. Yesterday, when I left school around 9:00 p.m. And driving home, I listened to a program. An attorney was speaking, and he said that the U.S. Constitution is the oldest constitution for democracy. And he says, but we still have problems. And I will just share with you. He says one of his biggest problems is the Supreme Court. And he's saying that these folks are not voted in, they are appointed. Granted, Congress has to approve it, but they are appointed. But he says his biggest problem is that they have lifetime tenure, which means it's very difficult to fire them. And so he's hoping that perhaps they could change the Constitution to make it a better union, a better, what he would call, democratic process, where people, not power, not money, but people decide who they want to represent them. And so on that note, I just want to say that in previous shows as well, which takes me to my third point, and then I can yield. There was the issue of likability of a leader, whether that matters. Of course it matters. I've never said it never matters. What I said, it's not the leading factor. It's not the leading factor. And where the UWP is concerned, I think there were constraints beyond their control. But I think this is a reset button, a time to look within and to strengthen. Now, the other thing that I would like to mention, but I would save it for later, is personality traits and reality. Leaders, there is a lady, her name is Margaret Herman. She's a sociologist and political scientist as well. And she looked at 80 different leaders in the world, and she looked at how they react to when people, for example, to look our local parlance, call their name. Do you get angry? Do you laugh it out? Do you react? How do you handle these things? And believe you me, that matters. And so, no one is perfect. But I believe this is a time that the opposition party need to come together and pull together and reset. With that being said, and that's my final note, it's predicted that next year will be a recession in the United States. And CEOs are looking now as to how they're going to survive that recession. So, of course, you will have to cut staff. You may have to do other things. But they are saying that sometimes transformation builds growth. That within a transformative period could set you up to be better to face what is coming forward. And I think the UWP right now is positioned at a place where they can use this as an opportunity to move forward. Mr. Gregoire, there are other things I would like to talk about, but I can talk about, for example.
Well, I'm thinking, but you're going to have a lot of time to
yes,
come back and talk about a lot of things. So
the other thing I would like to talk about is retail politics, that all politics is local, and we have to get on the ground. Of course, I would like to talk about what happened in Dominica today regarding the vendors.
Certainly. We'll give you some time to come back beyond.
Okay, thank you.
But I think you left us with a few things, a lot of food for thought. And you raised a couple of questions about leadership, and you said Lennox Linton is not a failed leader. I agree with you 100%. As a matter of fact, Lennox Linton has a solid legacy to stand on. And I'm sure when Simeon starts to look at the question of leadership, we will notice that. I mean, Gabriel Christian started mentioning some of the things that Lennox accomplished while he was the opposition leader of the United Workers' Party. He wasn't in government, accomplished stuff. And he caused the government to do things that they might not have done normally. So the question of, you mentioned something about a leader being in there for 20 years, and we spoke about the question of the need for term limits if you really want to have a solid democracy. How can one man? You mentioned the question of Syria, where a father left and the son took over. Were there free and fair elections? This reminds us that we're still waiting, Simeon, for a report about free and fair elections. That will hopefully help to bring us free and fair elections. We're still waiting. Obviously, we can't just wait on that report alone, but certainly as people who love democracy, we would like to see free and fair elections. Dion also mentioned the question of pressing the reset button. Yes, it's not just the UWP that press the reset button. The whole country has to look at the reset button. But we need to reset. We can't continue on the path that we're trotting right now. So he spoke about transformation can bring growth. Yes, it can. That's why I said this opportunity that we have now, Lennox Linton having offered that resignation, which many people would not have done, not of their own free will like this. It gives us the opportunity to look at our democracy in all its fragility. And then, Simeon, as I yield to you, I want us to again reflect on the weakness of our democratic institutions, the institution that's supposed to preserve and protect our democracies, like our IPO, like our Electoral Commission, our Police Service Commission, our Public Service Commission, the whole gamut. What has happened to all of those? If we're going to have a strong democracy, we must have strong institutions, right? And if the kind of leadership, when we talk about leadership, does away with the potency of all those institutions, what do we have left as a democracy? Is that something that we're experiencing now? Let me yield to you now, Simeon.
Okay, good night, Mr. G. Good night, Gable, a good friend of many, many years, mentor, how you call it, a comrade in the struggle in the days of the wilderness, especially in the 1980s, being both ourselves victims of political victimization and alienation and denial. Dr. George, good night to you. Good night to our gentleman on the console. Thanks for DJ for standing in for Lambie. And I want to join my thoughts of concern and prayers for Lambie tonight. He has been a stalwart, a champion, a very supportive person through not only the struggle, but to many people, and as well to Q95. So we lift our hearts and minds and voices in prayer for him tonight, hoping that our good Lord will restore him to some level of sin and mens sana, mens sana and corpore sano, so that he can return to where he rightly deserves to be. Mr. G, before I begin tonight, I would like to lend my voice to those who have given some level of tribute to Mr. Linton. Okay, I know Mr. Linton since I've been in Roseau Boys School. He taught me at the Roseau Boys School in common entrance class, and I always credit him for having taught us to think. A man who inspired in us the need for determination for success by reading for us a poem for 2 weeks and encouraging us to get the gist of the poem. And until we got the gist of that poem, he refused to teach us. And the gist of that poem was try and you will succeed at the end of the day. And he left us with a message that unless you try in life, you will never succeed. For me, I see Mr. Linton as a paradigm, a philosophical paradigm of stoicism and magnanimity, a paradigm of temporal virtues, of fortitude and persistence, and also a paradigm of spiritual prowess, of prayer and humility. And this is the gentleman that I know, and this is the gentleman whom has spurred our coming on this program tonight. I say stoicism because I don't think in recent times in Dominica there has been any individual who has been so maligned and vilified and victimized and persecuted and prosecuted like Lennox Linton. And in the midst of it all, he has been able to remain his calm, never utter a word of denigration or disrespect to the police, to the judiciary, or to anyone in authority, to be able to walk and drive the streets and go to parliament and speak on behalf of the people. That is stoicism. Stoicism is that virtue that draws from you that internal sinew of strength to be able to go in the battlefield unperturbed, undisturbed, and unscathed by the attacks that you go through. Magnanimity, because he has been able to still be able to be everybody's friend in spite of who has persecuted him and who has and still reach out to people and make the effort and be a man for all seasons. Fortitude and prudence, because I mean fortitude in the sense of having to face all that level of criticism, as Gabriel said, of being black and having a large nose and coming from Marigot and not finishing high school and all those kind of things, you know, and still be able to drive through that dark night, that dark forest, and come out as a knight, not as a champion for himself, but as a champion on behalf of the underprivileged, the oppressed, and most importantly, good governance in Dominica. and prudence, because of his demonstrative ability to think rationally and critically and analytically, and to bring to the fore a level of debate and discussion on national issues, which every Dominican should be able to admire and to be drawn to, because of his determination to bring to every level of discussion a certain heightened debate of depth, and as well humility and thing. And so I must pay tribute to him tonight, and he has resigned as leader of the Labour Party, which transitions me to speak of the topic at hand tonight, democracy.
Sorry, UWP. Not
UWP. What did I say?
Labour Party.
Oh my God, sorry. That is an anachronistic sin.
That doesn't exist anymore. Well, anyway.
And a very painful Freudian slip as well, to be of the United Workers' Party. But you see, Gable, it's not by coincidence, because in truth and in fact, when you do look at the United Workers' Party, you see it is indeed the Labour Party of Dominica today. Because indeed, the philosophies, the principles, and the practices of the Labour Party of Mr. Libla is now embodied in the United Workers' Party. So maybe that Freudian slip is a good accidental utterance. But we have to look at two things tonight: democracy and the economy. And when one thinks of democracy, right, and where we are today as a country, and when one thinks of the three pillars upon which democracy stands, that is the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature, which are the three arms of government, one cannot but come to the realization that the democracy, the ideal of democracy, which we speak of, as was cradled in places like Greece and the United Kingdom, as the model for good governance and the rule of peoples, by the way, to improve the quality of life of peoples, as articulated by Abraham Lincoln, as a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. This seems to have been decimated and obliterated from the mosaic of governance in Dominica. And by that I mean, when we look at the executive, we can almost say in Dominica, we don't have an executive. Because when we look at the model of what the executive is supposed to be to establish the reign of the Constitution in the land, we have to ask ourselves, and we must come to the realization that we do not have a proper executive in the country. Then when we look at the judiciary, a judiciary that has been compromised, a judiciary that is all seemingly corrupt, a judicial system that is all manipulated by the political powers that be, a judicial system made up of persons in the law, in the legal fraternity, and in the national security system, one that is manipulated by the whims and fancies of politicians and peoples who can direct who to persecute and who to victimize, and who to prosecute and who to punish unjustifiably. And while that same judiciary allows persons who are laden and burdened with criminal content, intent, and behavior to go scot-free. That should tell you something about our judiciary. And then, of course, our legislature, which is now the laughing stock of the world. I don't know when last you have sat and looked at the House of Assembly in Dominica. Apart, I must say, from the utterances of people like Mr. Lennox Linton, when you think that you look at the House of Assembly and you would swear that it is a group of young men and women playing cricket and marble hole by the riverside and giving out mape with each other and telling each other whose breadfruit is more ripe than whose grapefruit is more orange and whose orange is more yellow. That's the level of the legislature that we have come to in Dominica. A den of mape and a cesspool of castigating people in an honorable house without any respect. That's where we are today. So when we look at our level of democracy today, and we balance that with the state of our economy today, when we look at the three legs again of the economy, which is land, labor, and capital, we look at our land. Who owns the land of our people? When it is becoming increasingly clear that the majority of the land of Dominica is going into the hand of foreigners, of Chinese, of Arabs, of passport holders, where Dominicans and farmers of people of Wesley and Woodfordville and Marigot have been denied the possession of their very own land and given next to nothing for it. When a lot of our land has been bought by members of the international clan of so-called investors who seem to be buying out all the government property and the prime land of the state, land, which is the first major item for productivity. When we look at the labor element of Dominica, the brightest of our minds are leaving Dominica in droves. And not only are they leaving Dominica in droves, but many of them are being denied an opportunity to serve. We have medical doctors, we have engineers, we have civil engineers, we have educators, we have social scientists, we have people in culture who are being denied an opportunity to participate in the growth and development of their own country because of political reasons. And when you look, of course, at capital, our means of income, our passports that are sold for people unabated all over the world. So when you look at the two elements, democracy and the economy, which are supposed to improve the quality of the lives of our people, that tells you where Dominica is today. And it is very sad that we have reached the stage in Dominica when we have reversed every gain of people like Mr. Edward Oliver LeBlanc, a man who opened the door so the common man, so the countryman, so the Laboué, as Gebu said at the beginning, the poor people of Dominica, the rural folk, the farmer, the fisherman, the agriculturist, could be able to take a place, their rightful place in Dominica. Today, we find that all of these things have been reversed. And the efforts of Mr. LeBlanc to bring Dominica to the forefront of a shining example of democracy and economic progress and development has been undermined beyond measure. And so that has severely impacted the quality of our life, of our people, in the midst of elections being stolen repeatedly, in the midst of people living in Dominica being deprived of the opportunity to choose for themselves who must govern them, where people who have no stake in the country, who do not pay taxes, who sometimes send very little remuneration to Dominica, have come to Dominica and placed on the backs of Dominicans a government that they do not serve and who does not serve them, and who are only there for their benefit, to buttress and to support someone in power who, by all measure, is not interested in themselves. And so it is unfortunate that we have come to this juncture in Dominica today, that when we look at where we are today in terms of the political morass that we find ourselves in a situation, what I would call a political quagmire. A political quagmire because of the fact that on one side you have what you call a ruling elite of a privileged few who have undermined Dominica of its democracy and its economic development on one hand, and in the middle, I would say most critically, are what I would consider, and maybe you all may not agree with me, a very dangerous element of neutral lookers-on, a very passive bulk of opportunists who want to play left and play right in a safe zone while Dominica is going down the gutters and leading into the river, into the ocean of no return. So that we speak of people in the clergy, we speak of business people, we speak of professionals, we speak of the educated, whose main preoccupation is their survival for their own benefit, without any genuine vested interest in the democratic or economic process of Dominica. And if they become involved in the democratic or economic process of Dominica, they do so only at the expense of other people, at the oppression of other people, or at the denial of other rightful Dominicans to have their place in our society. And so this is where we are at. And so in closing, I think this is where now the whole scenario, the political scenario in which we find ourselves, which is why I was very much disappointed with the level of, you could say to some extent, animosity that was displayed yesterday on the radio, either by some people who were genuine and hurt, or by some blatant hypocrites on the radio expressing their sentiments about the resignation of Mr. Lennox Linton. But I think it is very sad, because you see, this is not what Dominica needs now. More than ever, Dominica needs people to come together, to be heralds of unity, to be champions against injustice, to be champions for the betterment of our people, to rally our efforts, our energies, our thoughts, and our actions together to save Dominica. And the departure of Mr. Linton as political leader of the United Workers' Party should generate in us an opportunity for renewal. And that opportunity for renewal must now beckon and call all those in Dominica who said that they were not supporting the United Workers' Party because of Mr. Linton to now come on board. They must now leave the Dominica Labour Party as they promised to do. They must now leave the sidelines as they promised to do. They must now leave the benches and the onlookers' position as they promised to do, because the obstacle is out of the way. And having recognized that Dominica needs that process of change, they must now be brave enough, courageous enough, stoic enough, magnanimous enough, have the level of fortitude and temperance to brave the weather and to decide that Dominica should not be where it is today. And so a new opportunity has emerged for leadership in closing. And so we need to ask ourselves, what kind of leadership do we need in Dominica now? What kind of leadership is the situation in Dominica beckoning us to come to now? What kind of political leader do we know? What kind of political leadership theory? Can we go back and examine what are the qualities we need of a good political leader? Can we now begin to really ask ourselves, do we need charisma to be a successful leader? What are the qualities that we need now for leadership in Dominica? And what are the qualities that we need to be looking for now in the leaders in Dominica? Are we going to look for people with a vision? Are we going to look for people who are humble, who are committed, who have a certain level of intentionality and the audacity to make a difference, with the level of courage that is necessary, and an intentionality and reflection to look at what is happening in Dominica and to stem the tide of what is happening in Dominica and take up the responsibility to lift people up. Lift up the young people today who are unemployed. Lift up the widows who cannot find a way. Lift up the farmers who are decaying. Lift up the fishermen, the teachers who are struggling, the policemen who are struggling, the firemen, the nurses, the elderly, the unemployed. Are we going to get people now who must take up that responsibility and forget the elements of personality and color and nose and name and origin and family background before we determine what is our position going to be as we champion the cause of the situations where people can hardly open a business if they want to? The banks with strangling interest rates on persons who want to think. If a hospital that is improperly resourced with all our best doctors going away, with a decaying police force, with an administrative government system that is laden with incompetent public servants and permanent secretaries who are bringing the system of government to ruin. Are we going to get people now, leaders, with that level of responsibility to step forward, to take up the mantle, now that the playing field is clear, and bring Dominica where it has to be?
Well, Simeon, obviously, all of what you expected is what.
Well said. Well said.
Well, I just was going to say that it is not unexpected. This is the Simeon Joseph that I know, but I know what he has just done, Gabriel, has now caused you to have, you have a lot of things he's put on your plate now to speak to and to expound on. And I know that you're ready to do that. But before I go to you, I want to alert DJ Shan that we must take the people's calls. And I'm going to ask DJ Shan in a minute to give the numbers and give the folks a chance to call in. But before I do that and go over to DJ Shan, let me just make two comments based on what Simeon said. The first thing he said, and I will go back to Lennox Linton here. He said something about his magnanimity and his humility. And he made a mention again about some of the comments that he heard on the radio after the resignation of Mr. Linton. What I can say that the Lennox Linton that I know, he does have that magnanimity. He does have that humility. And I know Simeon, that he is going to take on himself the responsibility to be the main instigator to unify the party. And as I said, what I expect Linton to do, and I'm pretty sure that is what we will see. We will probably see the United Workers' Party in a press conference with Isaac Baptist as the president and the Seeker, I think the name is, as the political leader, that she's interim now that Lennox has retired, and Mr. Lennox Linton between them, and they're telling everybody, listen, let's unify our party, let's embrace and bring everybody in, let us ensure that we move forward stronger than ever before. And I'm thinking that is what I will expect to happen. And he will be encouraging everyone, listen, we're going to have our delegates convention or whatever we're going to have, because they believe in democracy, their constitution, and they follow it every year. And they will elect a new leader, I'm sure. And I'm pretty sure that Linton will say to the nation, whoever is elected as the new leader of the party, I will be fully behind them and I will have a smooth transition to them. I'm pretty sure that's what we'll hear, because as you can see, Gabriel, you know, Simeon has the confidence in the magnanimity and the humility of Lennox Linton. One final thing I want to say, Gabriel, on the other side of the break, after I come back from DJ Shan, I will let you answer that question. Let me put it on the table now. When I listen to people like Simeon Joseph and Sean Douglas, don't you think that the future is bright, Gabriel? Don't you think that these are the kind of people that we might soon see in the Senate, as senators in the parliament?
Without a doubt.
Making the case for our country going forward.
Without a doubt. Lennox couldn't carry it on his back alone. We now have to see a flowering of democracy and democratic leaders. So
bringing everybody into the Big Ten. This is what democracy is all about. You know, involve people and let people get involved. You don't want people just standing on the side and looking. So I just want to go over, and I will come back to you as soon as I come from DJ Shan, Gebo. DJ Shan, could you please give our listeners the number so that they can call us whenever they feel like it, and we'll be happy to hear from them.
All right, thank you, Mr. G. The global view on Q. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097. If you're calling from a DG phone, 616-4257, and if you're calling on the overseas line, 305-432-9624.
So DJ Shan, as soon as you have a call, you just make me a sign, put your hand high enough that I can see you, so I can take the call from our callers. All right, so just let us know. But Gable, while we wait for the calls, let me just go over to you to take it from there. And don't be too unhappy, Gable, if we interrupt you when the calls come in.
Not at all. I just want to say how proud I am of Brother Dion George. He laid it out well. It's, in essence, if I can crystallize what Dion said, is what he said was, what shall be the quality of your service? Are you involved in political life simply so you can sit at the right hand of the Father and eat all the bread while others have none? So what shall be the quality of your service? And for Brother Simeon,
Gable, can we take a call?
Yeah.
Sean, go ahead, take a call.
Q95, hello, good night.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Simeon Joseph. I listen. So Simeon Joseph,
Yes.
you brought tears to my eyes tonight. Gentlemen, thank you for everything you said. It was well said. That is all I will say for tonight. Have a blessed night.
is that the lady? Is that the sister they call? Is that the beloved sister they call Blue Blue?
That is the lady who is one of a kind. There is no duplicate. She is called Blue.
I don't know the fine lady, but I've had occasion to
She's
hear
Dominica's Joan of Arc.
her, and I'm very pleased with her because what she has done in her many utterances is rescue our people from the shame of the acceptance of this one-party culture, this culture of intolerance, where people are arrested on bogus charges, people are victimized. Simeon said it, in the old days, Simeon, when the Labour Party was in the political wilderness,
Yep.
it was like you and I, and early Manuel and other brothers were victimized. And today, you're victimized again,
And sidelined
sidelined.
by a Labour Party that we fought for and suffered for.
Amen. 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 So let me just say what are the attributes of a democratic leader. A democratic leader of the kind that we want to have in the big tent. I see that the call is here again. I'll
Q95, hello, good night.
Hello, good evening. Good evening to your listeners and good evening to the panel. I just want to say a few things. Mr. Simeon Joseph, that energy you have is something that's much needed in Dominica today. And I don't know how much more we can add to what you have just presented tonight, because not only you are spot on, but there is an air of passion, and I think we need to really focus on simplifying the true meaning of democracy, so our listening public, the voters, the simple man can understand their role and their responsibility. Secondly, I'd like to say, like I said earlier in the other media, thanks to Mr. Leonard Clinton for being a fighter and a champion for democracy. And I think over the years, we have moved away from a people-focused government, but to a government of one man. And the majority of the population have basically lost their ability or have not owned up to their responsibility to ensure that there's a democratic process. And finally, I would say no one is entitled to the leadership of any party in Dominica and the government at that. And it is our responsibility, the responsibility of the people and the population in a true democracy to make the difference and understand that their responsibility is just as important as the ones in power. I am listening, and I know you guys will do a great job in informing the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And Sean, just let us know as the calls come in. We will take the calls. I'll go back to Gabriel, and Gabriel, you can please go ahead.
I just want to, apart from just giving credit to Simeon and Dion before, and Blue Blue who called, and the gentleman who called, I want to say that we're here this evening to ensure that government of the people, by the people, and for the people does not perish from this earth. That's why we're here. To paraphrase Abraham Lincoln at the Gettysburg speech in 1863. You see, because we're supposed to be a democracy. So we're supposed to be a government of the people. We're supposed to be a democracy, so we're supposed to be a government by the people. And we're supposed to be a democracy, and that's a government for the people. Do we have that today in Dominica? Any person with reasoned judgment, when you can assess the utterances of the Prime Minister who said words as, no law, no constitution can prevent me from doing what I want to do. When asked about the source of funds for campaigns, says, none of your damn business. Those very utterances are anti-democratic. They're anti-people power. They are possessed of a degree of arrogance and self-centeredness and narcissism. And so, in the new dispensation, for whomever shall follow Mr. Linton, and let me just say this, the job is not for one man or one woman.
No.
I believe what is coming out of this discussion is that we are asking the students now to gather in conference. We are asking the National Youth Council to get off its rusty dusty and to do the job of youth development and youth education. Stop being a pawn of the government in power. The National Youth Council was not designed to be a puppet of the government of the day, but supposed to serve young people. This is now a time for fisher folk to gather in conference and to see what it is has to be done to help fisher folk. This is the time for farmers to come together in conference and to rebuild the farmers' union so that farmers can have a strong voice for agriculture. This is now a time for all business people to get together under that big tent that we seek to build for the new leadership of tomorrow.
Gable, let's take a little call.
Go right ahead.
Yes, good evening, Mr. G.
Hi,
Good evening
you
to
good?
your illustrious panel, and good evening to your man on the console. I will start my presentation by quoting the late Pierre Charles. I can handle the opposition. It is the criticism from within that I cannot handle. And I will add, in the words of the friend of Julius Caesar in William Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, in gratitude, more than the daggers that stung caused me more grief. And the result of my death was in gratitude. And so by saying this, I have no problem with change, not at all. But when it comes from within, on someone who had withstood so much vilification from outside, so much attacks, where were all these persons? Where were they to defend and stand with Mr. Leonard Clinton? Where were they pushing back when they claim that he fell out, he dropped out of grammar school in fourth form? In fact, a friend got angry with me because I pointed out to him that was a lie, that Lennox had completed his certificate in Form 5A, the same time with a younger brother of mine who has subsequently passed. Where were they? I didn't hear any pushback. Where were those same persons when they were vilifying Thompson Fontaine, accused him of all sorts of things? I didn't hear them pushing back. That is the problem with some of our Dominican people. Everyone wants to be a chief. No one wants to be an Indian. And so in our disjointed way of kind of political tribalism, we try to take down each other. Because I cannot understand how persons, sensible persons, could allow themselves to follow the dictate of the opposition. It was mainly the opposition outsiders. And as Gable alluded to, this question of somebody from Marigot, because most of the people, that was their problem. That has nothing to do with the problems that we are facing in Dominica. You mean to tell me all those persons who lost their campaigns because Lennox didn't wave or smile to their constituents? Is it the only problem we have in Dominica is that Lennox doesn't smile and he doesn't wave to people? Is that the problem we have in Dominica? Unemployment is rampant. The economy is in disarray. Agriculture is in the rocks. We're talking about climate resilience. We have not replanted our forests. Our rivers are being destroyed. People are living in abject poverty. There are people still in tarpaulin, don't have a roof after Maria. And what we're talking about is Lennox doesn't wave and he doesn't smile. I want to ask all those persons, how many times did Eugenia smile and wave? How many times? It's not whether you smile or whether you wave, it's what you do, it's what as a policy. Your concern for the country, the people, development. We wanted, in fact, in 2000, the campaign was about corruption. They said, it is not about performance. It is about corruption. Now they're walking in corruption. They're sitting in corruption. They're bathing in corruption, but they are silent. But they're concerned about Lennox Linton does not smile and he doesn't wave for people. And some of them even hide from him, you know. If they see him coming, they hide so he won't wave to them. And this is the sort of nonsense that we have in Dominica. I tell you, instead of we focus on the man that has divided the country, destroyed the economy, reduced the country to mendicancy and poverty. Someone talked about the institutions of democracy. By the way, democracy is a relative concept. And I don't think we even teach civics in school anymore. So the young people have no idea what democracy is. The first thing Sheridan did was dismantle the institutions of democracy. And the one that I'm not hearing people talking about is the court, the judiciary. The judiciary, the final pillar of democracy that can put some kind of semblance of balance between the people and a rogue government. That has joined the side of the rogue government. So the people have no protection.
Let me just interrupt you a little bit.
I don't want to take more of your time. God bless you.
No, I mean, I want to tell you we appreciate all your comments, and I really want to know if we can. I know we've spoken to some of those issues. We defended Lennox on those fronts, and we established that Lennox has a solid legacy to stand on. We've already established that. Simeon, you wanted to say something in response to the callers?
Well, yes, Mr. Green. The topographical landscape of politics is a treacherous one. Okay? And anyone who decides to enter into politics has to be prepared to face various forms of human weaknesses by themselves and by others. Treachery is one of them. I don't think there is one politician in the world who has not faced treachery from within and without. It happened to Harold Macmillan. It happened to Winston Churchill, one of the greatest prime ministers of the United Kingdom. Margaret Thatcher faced an internal coup. As a matter of fact, she resigned because of the internal coup within her cabinet. Ronald Reagan, George Bush, Jimmy Carter, as a matter of fact, had a lot of undermining within his own cabinet. Manley, Eric Williams. So we need to shift from calling foul on a level of treachery, because treachery is part of the political landscape. And it is unfortunate that it is part of the political landscape. But what is the true test of any leader? Any leader, that's why I said Mr. Linton is a stoic person, is to be able to face that treachery, that crookedness, and still be able to keep your hand on the steering wheel of the ship through the storm of political endurance. That is the true test of a leader. That's the true test of a leader. And I will say further that when we even look at let me say, I was young in the Dominica Labour Party movement when there were people I remember in 1971 when Mr. Libler had to get rid of Enne and Ducre, Mabel Moore, James, and what is the other one? Ronald Amore, because of what they were undermining him. And they were undermining him, and my father was in the heart of and I grew up in the Labour Party movement. It is because they felt that that little boy, the agriculturalist from Vacaz, should not be the one in charge of the governance of Dominica. And Mr. Libler resigned also as Premier of Dominica, not so much because of the opposition from the Dominica Freedom Party or the DUPP at the days, but even because of the ranks in the Labour Party. There was an elite group in the Labour Party who were constantly undermining him. Patrick John faced the same thing. I personally witnessed and heard with my 2 ears 3 of Patrick John's ministers, okay, with the then Speaker of the House and an executive member of the Labour Party at Mount Bruce, vilifying him and saying the worst things about him, to the extent that he had to fire Mike Douglas and Ferdinand Parilo. Mr. Serafin faced it. Eugenia Charles faced it, and she will tell you that. She's far from my most favorite politician because of how I suffered under her. But I have to respect her because of the level of dignity and integrity that she, in other words, they say in Dominica, high shady die blah. Miss Charles was a prime minister who, in spite of her personal weaknesses, brought the level of governance in Dominica to a very high level of integrity. And I salute her for that. Edison James faced it. Rosie Douglas faced it. Pierre Charles faced it. So what I want to encourage people who support the United Workers' Party to do is to put to rest the cry of Lennox being undermined and victimized and backstabbed, etc. We have to recognize that in spite of that, he was a gentleman who, because of his personality, his level of integrity, and the character that he was able to not allow that to blind his ability to lead or to demonstrate his potential as a future prime minister of this country. And so he has resigned. But let us not create a sense of suspicion and finger pointing and labeling and crying foul and move on as to where we can move on. Lennox is going to be the opposition leader. And that is a classic, as Dion said and Gabu said, in the history of democracy. Where perhaps, well, it won't be the first time, it'll be the third time, because Eugenia Charles, Spags, and now Lennox have not been the political leaders of their party, but are leaders of the opposition. And that speaks to a certain level of organization and democracy within the UWP, which can serve as a shining example to the government in power today. I dare anybody on the government side to even say or utter one word of deference or defiance to the person sitting in the seat of Prime Minister of Dominica. I dare them. I challenge them, or to speak differently. And so what we have to do is to take that healthy approach. And I am a person who believes that, out of every flux, creativity will come. And we as I said, we will now begin to see where leadership is, because you have to give Mr. Linton his kudos for recognizing that he needs to step aside. In other words, as what was it again, Dr. George, when John the Baptist said, Jesus must increase and I must decrease.
No, he said repent. He said repent and be baptized.
No, that's why when John the Baptist came in for making way for Jesus, remember he was the herald, and he said, I must decrease so Jesus can increase.
Yeah,
that is why I spoke of Mr. Linton as a humble person. It is not easy for someone who holds the position of leadership of a party as a prospective prime minister, who having commanded the largest number of votes in the past 2 elections, to step aside for someone else to come in. You must admire the character of the man who does something like that. And so we need to embrace that moment that is placed on our laps.
Well, clearly, we need to embrace that. Gabriel, just before I go back to you, let's take one call here from DJ Shan.
Q95, hello, good night.
Hi, good evening. Am I on air?
Yes, sure.
Good evening, gentlemen, on this panel, and to the listeners. Thank you for accepting my call. This is my first time calling. I just wanted to share with the Dominican public, as well as with the Honorable Lennox Linton, who's recently made a swift but assured decision to resign from his current post to another, that I fully support his intentions, as difficult as it may have been for him to act upon. You see, for me personally, sir, for the past few years, his voice has resonated for me as a strong lion in Dominica, and I admire his gait. These valiant qualities he possesses to speak boldly and confidently, like that of the ancestors, on behalf of individuals who were unable or are unable to do so for themselves, did not go unrecognized. And I want him to know that. I sincerely wish for these qualities, along with his strength, especially, will continue to follow him into the next chapter, whatever it may be for him. I wish him well. So I'm pleased with Honorable Linton's decision to offer himself as an example against stale and stagnant dictates and dictator-like ideologies, you see, in other nations that unfortunately Dominica has adopted. And we all know the main dependence on the selling of Dominica's passport is an example, and it's a great stench. That is the truth of the matter. Whether we pretend to be willfully blind to it, this is the truth. So it would be very foolish for the Dominican people to interpret this change as something negative. So allow the law of attraction for change to flow. No one, gentlemen, including myself, can request change from others without it first manifesting in our own lives. Why would anyone demand or request change from others? You wish to request change from an organization or even a political party without first placing that responsibility upon yourself to reciprocate the same for the better. It makes no sense. So allow the law of attraction for change to flow. This current change that I see happening, that has finally reached its peak in the opposition, I'm excited to see that momentum will no doubt trickle down to the Dominica Labour Party, where the leader at some point, I believe, must step down, whether by the raised voices of Dominicans or by the acts of God. There is no justification, gentlemen, for the Dominica Labour Party's leader's abuse of power to tear gas. And this is what affects me still. To tear gas a sleeping village for hours on end to maintain power. Yet, if any Dominican went missing tonight in those bushes, there may be only one guard dog. And I don't know if it's a poodle from somebody's backyard, sir. I don't know if it barks like Michael Jackson. Who knows? I haven't seen this dog. So it's very interesting and very refreshing for me to see what is transpiring, as change by default brings turbulence and chaos. But as you know, it's in the chaos the answers are found. So I'm just here to say tonight to Mr. Linton, thank you, sir, for your sacrifice, and God bless you, and Godspeed.
And extremely, extremely well said as well, Gabo. I mean, I told you, let us leave it to the ladies.
Well, I frankly want to endorse the young lady in everything that she said. Extremely well put, very eloquent. And I frankly believe it's time for the ladies to step forward. I think what she was saying was that this is not a tragic event. This is an opportunity. That what Lennox Linton has done by his majestic step to step aside is to open the door for all those who have the cojones, as you see, not just the balls, but also the the auricular fortitude, as in women, those who are like the young lady, so passionate about our democracy. And she's essentially issuing a clarion call. You know what this young lady really said? Not only did she pay tribute to Leonard, but she was saying to all Dominicans, folks, stop waiting on one man or one woman to carry the load of state. The issue of development is not one that is given to be in a spectator sport. We can only build Dominica where we have people meeting at parish level, the St. George's Hall, the Goodwill Parish Hall, the different credit union halls we have in the country. We need to see all people gather in conference. It's a team effort. So if we have 4-H clubs and we have different youth groups and women's groups, National Women's Council, Society for the Aged, the farmer folk, as I was saying before, we need to gather and understand that the message of the transition in leadership of the United Workers' Party should be emulated by the Dominica Labour Party. That no party in Dominica is the province of one man, of one family, of one oligarchic elite. That in a democracy, an active citizen is one who takes steps to vote in elections, to be informed about the Constitution, to be informed about the Finance Act, to be informed about the Procurement Act, to know what rule of law means, to know what we mean when we say we want a professional civil service, one in which a civil servant doesn't have to wear a red shirt or a red hat and blow a red horn and jump up and down in the sun playing the fool, but he or she is free to be professional in their duties without fear or favor, that they serve the state of Dominica, not any party or any man. So this is a time really for us to begin to revive and rejuvenate those democratic impulses that will make for a better country. And what are those impulses? A democratic leader is one who believes in collaboration, where members of his group are encouraged to share ideas and opinions, even though the leader may retain the ultimate say. Do we have that in Dominica now? Or is there just one voice being heard? A democratic leader believes in engagement, not simply with his own party, but with the entire citizenry. He or she believes in inclusivity. So, for instance, he will consult with the leader of the opposition in major appointments, director of public prosecution, chief of police. Is that happening in Dominica today? No, it is not. A truly democratic leader also believes in allowing the creativity of the society to flourish. So he's not like a big tree, a big baobab tree in the savannah, shading all the little trees so they remain saplings, they never get to grow. No, a truly democratic leader encourages creativity in the arts, in the sciences, in culture, so that the country can really move forward. Is that happening in Dominica today? No. All you have is a government using passport money and other ill-gotten gain to hire expensive foreign artists at the expense of local talent, right? And then have them come and prance on the stage to fool the people for another election one more time. That's what we have in Dominica. So you have no real innovation in industry. You have no real productivity in agriculture. You have a languishing cultural sector when you have people like Gordon Henderson and many other well-accomplished Dominican artists all over the world. But are they included? Are they at the apex? Is there a national cultural commission? No. You have a one-party state and a one-party state culture, and that won't do for Dominica. And it must come to an end. Lennox's transition offers us an opportunity to do better.
And certainly, let me just take the opportunity before we go and take any more calls. Let me just take the opportunity, gentlemen, to acknowledge some of the many hundreds of folks that we have on Facebook following us now. Many people on YouTube as well. But I just thought I'd try and pull out a few names, and I'll try and pull out a few more names later. And thank you for really being with us tonight and making your comments. I see Augustina John here. I see Veronica Pascal. I see Francis Benjamin. I see Not Nice Artido. I see Claudia Carlton, Miranda Williams. I see Augustina John, Emil Paben Sira, Judith Cochran, I see Marshall Lawrence. Yes, I see you. I see Merlina Charles. Somebody calls himself. I see Gregory Antoine. I see Andy John. I see let's see here. Maslin Edwards is there with us. I see let's see you again here. Who I can pick up you. Lucilla Roye, Carbon Lawrence, that's Coulson Lawrence. I see, well, there's so many people. Samantha Robinson is also here with us. And I really can't read all of your comments because there's so many comments there. But certainly good to know that you're with us here tonight. Kingdom Citizen is there as well. And Clarence, that's Caroline Warrington is here also with us. I will try to pull out some of the names again and acknowledge you, but I just want all of you to know, yes, also Gregory Antoine, we appreciate you. Really happy with it, that you're here with us here tonight. We hope that we are making saying something that makes sense to you, and I hope you can appreciate some of what we're doing. I really wish we could get your calls, and if you can call in and let us hear from you. I find some of the people who have called have been tremendous. Let's take a call now. Videshan.
Q95, hello, good night.
Greetings, brothers.
Greetings.
Yeah, good night, Mr. G, and Dr. George, Simeon, the entire panel. Good night. The question I have that's really bothering me is that maybe Mr. George could answer this one. Can we protect democracy, or can we maintain a democracy while protecting the institution that seeks to do good for the majority of the people? And why I ask this question is because it goes right back to the principle of disloyalty, undermining. Because in a democratic system, all voices have to be content. And it's not everything your leaders say or anyone say you're going to agree to. You could always object or have a different perspective, which is acceptable and should be listened to. But at the same time, I see history just repeating itself over and over again. I hear Simeon talk about what happened to Patrick John, in that his ministers were undermining what the entire party and the committee to do to help the people. We see it happen with Roosevelt Skerrit. When Pierre was prime minister, he left without the knowledge of the prime minister and meet with the foreigners, some foreign people with China, without the knowledge of the prime minister. And to me, that shouldn't be tolerated, because you have to be committed to the principles of the party. Well, me, if I'm going to join an organization, that means I agree, because I support the UWP, I agree with the vision, the plans, the programs they put forward. And if I agree with that, I'll be committed to these principles to do good for the majority of the people. But I cannot understand, within any organization, you have a set of people, and it's common, as you gentlemen know, that some people within that same organization will seek to undermine the same issue, the same principle they pledge to be committed to. And to me, Patrick John was right on fire in the minister, like the Douglas guy. And Piero had the responsibility to fire Roosevelt Skerrit. And that goes to the UWP. If you are committed to the principles of the party, you believe in the vision, the plans, the programs, the aspiration to help people and to better the country, and you are found undermining the principle, that's not disagreeing with a policy or disagreeing with a principle or a program or a statement made by any member. To me, that is, we cannot tolerate this thing, and moving forward, we have to be very careful, my brothers, because if you disagree with the principles and the programs and the policies, you should resign or come up and make it plain. You cannot be in an organization seeking to undermine the leadership of your organization. That's treachery.
Yeah,
You know,
thanks,
so my question
thanks a
again
lot,
is,
Paula.
can we maintain a democratic system
Yeah, thanks a
by
lot, Paula. Appreciate that.
protecting the principle and the values of what we're trying to do, brothers? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to thank you because yeah, I can see that you want to express, and we want everybody to express. We do have a lot of calls coming in, and we're hoping that we can keep the comments short. We have a lot of comments coming in on WhatsApp as well. Somebody is saying, will the new UWP leader recognize the urgent need for a united opposition? You know, the question of bringing in all opposition forces into the big tent. Somebody's asking about that. And DJ Shan, if you don't have a call, I will go back very briefly to Attorney Gabriel Christian, and then I would want to go to Dion George because I know he has quite a few comments that he wants to make. And please call if you want to call. Please call us. We'll take your calls.
Brother Sheridan, the question really is, when shall the young Dominicans take the rightful place? When Simeon and I were engaged in this whole issue of good governance, we were in our teams. And what has been the winning formula of this party, apart from using monies from passport sales and other ill-gotten gain to pervert the cause of democracy? Are we as a people susceptible to bribery? Are we as a people just too gullible? Are we as a people ones who have abdicated our sense of civic duty and responsibility to be patriotic and put country over selfish interests? I was told that there was a rally by the democracy marchers one Wednesday, and a woman on the side of the street said, me, I can't be with those people because I need to get my house. The same houses that they don't have titles for. The same houses where I think a letter accompanying the transition says, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. So where we are as a society, so given to bribery, so given to gullibility, so given to celebratory events and shows and sparkling tinsel and fireworks and the dimpled smile, the power of that ever so effervescent dimpled smile. Are we serious? Can we call ourselves serious people as Dominicans? We've got to look within. This is not simply a moment for the big tent. We need that. The unity among all opposition forces, we need that. The coming together of all people. But it's also a time for serious self-reflection, introspection. We need to ask ourselves, what shall be the quality of our service? What is the caliber of my civic virtue? And am I susceptible to bribery and to mama guy and brew and that kind of, distraction? And so, as Simeon said, we cannot allow ourselves to be involved in the finger pointing. Somebody once said, you point one finger forward, four looking back at you. The reality is, someone said it, it is normal, I think Simeon said it, in any political organization to have criticism. And criticism must not be misunderstood as treachery. Not everybody's going to agree with you. Even Jesus Christ among his disciples on that famous evening, when he looked around on the I think Dion is more knowledgeable than I am. I think when he surveyed the field in the Garden of Gethsemane, I know Simeon may have been there, but I wasn't. He said that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And that is the human quality we have to confront. But the point is, the gentleman has done his duty. It is not for others to rise up and do theirs. So get off the block, folks. Get off your rusty dusty. Join the organization, pay your dues, and seek to inspire a better Dominica by your actions, not just what you say, but what you do.
Thanks a lot, Gabo. Let me just read a quick comment I have on WhatsApp just before I go over to Dr. Dion George for his further comments. The prospects for stable democracy in a country are improved if its citizens and leaders strongly support democratic ideas, values, and practices. The most reliable support comes when these beliefs and predispositions are embedded in the country's culture and are transmitted in large part from one generation to the next. In other words, the country possesses a democratic political culture. I thought these are very fine words, very deep words. Dr. Dion George, just before I go over there, let's take a call, DJ Sean, and then we'll go over to Dr. Dion George.
95, hello, good night.
Hello.
Go right ahead.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, go right ahead.
Go right ahead.
Yes, I'm calling to make a point. I keep hearing people talking about democracy. Dominica is not a democratic country, only on paper. When you have police using tear gas on people the day of an election, what kind of democracy is that? And the man who was leading the United, the UWP, he did a wonderful job. May God continue to bless him. Thank you.
And thank you very much for that comment. Dr. Dion George?
Yes, Mr. Gregoire, thank you. And I want to thank the callers for their contribution. The last caller, I think he sort of resonates with a previous caller. And one of the callers said that we are speaking about democracy, but democracy is really a relative phenomenon. It's a relative factor. And that's true because I have a textbook there and it's called Democracies. And the author of that book is a scholar from a university in California. And he identified 36 different versions of democracies, 36, particularly in Latin America, where you can cross the floor and you can be elected by your constituents. And after they elect you, you can cross the floor. And one might say that's illegal, but we have that in Dominica too. And there are many different versions of democracy. So I'm saying this to say that now that the leader of the opposition party has resigned, the question, which is my original premise, is a reset bottle. What sort of democracy do we want in Dominica? Do we want a democracy where the prime minister can be there for 50 years? Do we want a democracy where members of parliament can be charged with criminal crimes for as vicious as child abuse and still be held in office? Do we want a democracy where persons are caught doing illegal, what they call white-collar crimes, soliciting drugs or passports, and go scot-free? What sort of democracy do we want? So he's right. The caller is right that democracy is relative. I will tell you this. In about 1778, that is 2 years after the independence of the United States, which was 1776, July 4th, a lady met Benjamin Franklin and she says, "So what kind of government did you give us?" He says, "Ma'am, we give you a republic, if you can keep it." What he meant by that is that the government is not the people that are elected, The government really are the constituents, the people that elect certain few people to represent their interests. And I know Gabriel know about, and he can correct me, about the Declaration of Independence, where they talk about that we have certain elements, certain rights that are inalienable, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if a government goes against those fundamental rights, it is the responsibility of the people to overthrow that government and elect a new one. And I always remember Mark, Gabriel, you can correct me, is it Mark Twain or Mark Paine who has the Common Sense?
Mark Twain.
Twain.
Thomas Paine wrote the book Common Sense.
Common Sense.
Yes.
And the sense of that book is that he's saying that if you have a government and it's not working for you, you have to overthrow that government. But I want to respond specifically, thank you, Mr. Gregoire, for giving me this airtime, to a caller who put a very direct and I would say salient question. And he says, perhaps Dr. George can answer. He mentioned about institutions and whether or not, if the institution is not working, if there are elements within the institution, I think it's a troubling question. And I think for the most part, the discussion of this evening is a healthy conversation that looks toward moving forward. But I am one who is very objective. And I also want to make sure if we move forward that we have a solid base. What I mean by that is there's what is called groupthink, i.e., that there may be certain people within the party or within Dominica that have certain opinions of individuals. That's not good for the institution of the political party. And we have to deal with it directly. Now, he did not make any accusation. He just brought up the question. And it's healthy to bring up questions. I don't think he's saying anything negative. And I think it's worth discussing. The other thing I would say is this. Eric Williams, one of the first prime ministers of Trinidad and Tobago, one time he asked his cabinet, if he leave, who they think should replace him? Something of that sort. And some folks says, man, I don't think you're going to leave. And some, those who said that they're going, he fired them. He fired them completely. One might say that's very autocratic, but we all know Eric Williams is a champion of democracy. Led the self-determination for Caribbean people with Marcus Garvey and them. So I'm saying that there are times that we really have to self-introspect. And I think Gabriel said that too. So I want us to really restart that bottle to go forward. The last thing I would say is when my good friend, Mr. Joseph, was speaking, he talked about what is a good leader. I have some thoughts on that. Please allow me to vent it. A good leader is one that can allow people to follow them. Not every time people will agree with you. There are times you come with an idea and people might think your idea is way off the left or the right. But you have to be able to stay there and convince them to follow you. There's a saying in American politics and perhaps globally that politics is local, that there's something called retail politics. One of my favorite terms is called social capital, where you meet with people one-on-one. And if there is a certain view about who you are or what people say about you, you meet them. You meet them, maybe not face-to-face, but perhaps according to Gabriel, in a town hall meeting. And you meet with them and you tell them, this is what I am. And you might believe me or not, they might have a totally different view of your perspective, your platform, and even your personality, because all three matters. And so I think this is, again, an opportunity for transformational growth. That the party need to recognize that they need to, one, be collective, and two, it's not about individual, it's about the principle of what the party stands for. And I think somebody mentioned earlier that the principle of the UWP today resembles the principle of the old Labour Party. Perhaps that's true. But I really want to just give this.
I think to be quite accurate, they said it resembles the principles of the Labour Party.
Good. Which I don't think that we are that diverted away. Yes. In other words, that they stand for justice. They stand for the common man. I think that's it. And on that note, I want to just bring it up because it exists. Someone called, I think it's a female voice, and they mentioned the idea that how do we as Dominican people can sit there and drink the Kool-Aid of on the eve of an election, a village was bombarded with tear gas and bullets. And it's like nothing is happening. That is why, Mr. Gregoire, I am so thankful for Nitcliffe, that we stand for the environment, but we also stand for social justice. There are certain things that really has to be asked. Nobody is anti-government. We love Dominica. But how can you do that to our people? I mean, come on, imagine somebody do that to Granby, your grandmother, your sister, that not into politics, a Christian lady, go in church and have to carry her grandmother out on the eve of an election. Something is not right with that. And all Dominicans should recognize that and not sweep it under the floor. So these are things that are burning my spirit, burning my soul. And so I guess one of my ending points would be this. What do we want for Dominica moving forward? Do we want a country where one party is in control forever and that's it, like when we had kings and queens, or like Cuba? Or do you want a party with a dynamic, and the word dynamic really means changes and growing, progressive parties where we can compete like Democrats this year, Republicans next year, and everybody is on their toes? You better respond to what the people want. There is something which is called human nature. Thomas Hobbes, an English philosopher, says that you cannot change human nature. And he defines human nature as being brutish, selfish, and mean. There are some people in the Labour Party that have expressed themselves as being, I won't use those words, but they reference themselves as animals. Real bad animals. And Thomas Hobbes says, you cannot change human nature. And so how you as a leader, the question I'm referring to here is what my good friend Simeon spoke about. What kind of leader do we want? Are you going to fight every fight that comes to you? Or do you let it slide down like water on a duck's back on a dashing leaf? Let it slide. Do you pick your fights? And so a leader has to be one that knows when to engage. A leader has to be one that can let people rally around them. Interestingly, a leader has to be one sometimes to yield even to those that are against you. Because you know the old story, an enemy of my enemy, something like that, is my friend. If you look at the war in Syria, Russia and the United States, they were both against ISIS. Today, they're against each other. And so these are very deep philosophies and deep thoughts that one should consider. And I think, as we all have agreed on this panel tonight, the resigning of the opposition leader of the party, it speaks volumes. It speaks the level of epiphany of what democracy is. And it creates an avenue for transformational growth.
Right. Now, thank you, Dr. Leon George, for that. Simeon, I want to go back to you because I want to revisit that comparison that was made. I think you're the one who came up and said something to the effect that the UWP now appears to embody the Labour Party. I think this is a kind of comparison that you made. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Well, what do you mean?
Anyone who has been associated with the history and the evolution of the labor movement in Dominica, okay? Let us not forget the genesis of the word labor. Gabo, you are the historian, you bear me out. On the heels of the Moyne Commission and the need to drive self-governance. Am I correct, Gabo?
Absolutely. The Labour Party came out in the Labour movement, the Dominica Trade Union came out in 1945, and the Labour Party came out in 1955, 10 years later, as a child of the Labour movement. Exactly. So the Labour movement preceded the Labour Party.
Right. And then the emergence out of that, of the need to self-governance, the emancipation of the masses, all right? The liberation of the working class, okay? Which is what gave rise to the birth of the labor movement that characterized itself into a Labour Party, yes, whose main philosophy and principle was the upliftment and the advancement of not the elite, not the high-skin colored people, not the bourgeois and the militaires of Rousseau, but the common folk, the country folk. And so therefore it was when I talk about the philosophies and the principles of the vision of Miss Allfrey and Mr. Low Black and Mr. LeBlanc and Patrick John to lift up the common man.
As a matter of fact, Simeon, to add to what you're saying, Felicia Allfrey came in for a lot of criticism from those of her class because
exactly.
They felt she had betrayed, because for those who do not know, Felicia Allfrey was a local white aristocrat who had gone to England and become involved in the Fabian socialist movement with Honoré and Beving and the Labour Party in England, and returned to Dominica after the war to join with E.C. Black to form the Labour Party. And she actually had gotten information from the Moyne commissioners as to what should be done in Dominica to ameliorate the poverty-stricken condition of the working people of Dominica.
Exactly.
They brought the Moyne Commission to Pong, for instance. E.C. Black had brought them around to all the boot shams in Roseau, in the Quest, and so on, to see the palace nature of our living conditions. And so here was a party that was seeking to elevate. And the question is, where has all of that gone now? Where has
Exactly. And so what it did, Sheridan, was to take the poor people and give them proper housing, okay? Ensure that they educated themselves and took the responsibility for the future into their own hands. There was a massive movement of empowerment of peoples, not a spirit of dependency.
That's right.
Not people going at the beck and call of politicians for them to live and eat and breathe and have a shelter over their head. The philosophy of the Labour Party was to empower people to work, so that when you work, you provide for yourselves, you build your family, you put a roof over your head, you empower your children, and by empowering your children, you make your contribution to the country. That is the philosophy of the Labour Party. And the principle of the Labour Party was that it was an unselfish tendency. Because if you look at the early days of Mr. LeBlanc didn't care about who was Labour, who was DUPP, who was Freedom, who was bourgeois, to provide for them. As a matter of fact, he did so at the highest level and altar of self-sacrifice.
Amen.
Denying himself and his very family of the opportunities so that every Dominican can have an opportunity. This is the philosophy of the Labour Party that I know, that I was born into, that I grew up in. And which sadly, when you look at it today, it's no longer. The Labour Party has become this opportunistic tool where those who want to subjugate the working class and have total and absolute control over the common man have regained that position. Because if you look to see who is now in the Labour Party today, these are the very same people that Mr. LeBlanc had to fight against and who were fighting Mr. LeBlanc for the liberalization and the amelioration of the working class people of Dominica. And so when I study, and I still have a copy of the original Labour Party constitution, the Reformed Constitution of 1971, the Labour Party Constitution of 1976, I have the Manifesto of 1971 and 1975 and 1980, okay, and 1985 and 1990, and 1995 and 2000, the Labour Party manifestos then, and I have that of the Constitution of the United Workers' Party, and I see the efforts, particularly 4.5 years that the Labour Party, the UWP Party, was in governance. That is why people could say they were doing two-partyism, and they were criticized for it. One of the mantras that was used against them is that they were doing two-partyism. And this is what some people fought against. But you see, Sheridan, one of the frightening things in Dominica is...
That's the Labour Party Constitution of 1958, Simeon. I'm not sure if you
right, great. Beautiful. We share that resource, Gable. We share that resource.
Send it to you tonight.
Right. And then you see, Sheridan, one of the things that we who have emerged from the common man in Dominica, ordinary parents, know is that there has always been that force in Dominica, what I would call a certain elite section of our population, who have always sought to control people. And if they cannot control them, they will try their best to sideline others. And that's what has happened in the politics. And so what has happened today, this elite group of people have arrested, so to speak, the Labour Party that we have now, so that they can manipulate and control for their own benefit. And that is what is happening. When you look at the people who are aligned with the Labour Party today, who are involved with the Labour Party today, these are the very people who undermine Mr. LeBlanc, who undermine Patrick John, who did not support Rosie Douglas, who laughed at Rosie Douglas on many occasions, only because they felt that they were in the wilderness of the economic and political and administrative power of Dominica. And so now they have gotten control again, because these are the people who control Dominica. And when you drive around Dominica, you go to Castle Bruce, you go to the Carib Territory, Marigot, Wesley, Woodford Hill, Calibishi, Portsmouth, Vacaz, Spenville, St. Joseph, La Plaine, Grand Fort, Grand Bay, Point Michel, Newtown, Kings Hill. You see once again a total disintegration of the middle class of Dominica. The people whom Mr. LeBlanc had empowered from poverty to middle class. Today our policemen and our nurses and our public servants can hardly make ends meet.
Right.
Look at what is happening to the vendors on the bayfront.
Well, this is the
Being
point
treated as non-entities.
I alluded
Fishermen and farmers and now have to be begging to make a living. So we have now a certain elite group of people who have enriched themselves at the expense of the state, and a very large and expanding and increasing group of poor people who have to be groveling and begging at the doorsteps of the political elite so that they can pay their bills, make a daily bread, send their children to school. And now they are told for you to do anything, you have to go to a politician. For you to pay your bills, for you to bury your dead, for you to have a birthday party, for you to go to the dentist, for you to go to the doctor, for you to get a sheet of plywood and a sheet of galvanized, you have to go to a politician. Whereas in the coming out of the 70s and the 80s, these people could boldly. I worked at the Aid Bank. And for the 2.5 years that I worked at the Aid Bank, I saw farmers coming in with their checks of $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 and buying vans cash. And cashing that and going out and taking a loan this month and paying it off next month. And when we would visit and the Aid Bank would do the field visits in Wesley, Woodford Hill, Marigot, you could see, how you call it, farmers going to the building supply stores and buying materials cash to build their 3 and 4 bedroom houses. How many parents of Wesley, Woodford Hill, Calibishi did not even have to take a loan? Will Skelsig did not have to take a loan to send his many children to the United States to study. He didn't have to go to the government. RBD Douglas could sell his coconuts and send all his children to universities, making them one of the most successfully academic families in Dominica, from Rosie Douglas to Mike Douglas to Afflin Douglas. He didn't have to take a loan to do that. He did it all from his pocket. And so today we find that even the so-called elite of Dominica today have to beg a government minister for their children to go to university. And what do? They do it at the expense of the poor people. So while they get their children to go to the elite universities around the world, the poor people of Dominica have to go to Monroe University, Grambling University, Midwestern University, and still go to Aid Bank to take a loan, while these rich people are getting full scholarships from government, aided and abetted by permanent secretaries in places like the Ministry of Education, who ensure that that kind of opportunistic exploitation continues. That is a sad story.
Let me just go back to the original thing that you said.
Outstanding, Simeon. Outstanding.
Let me just say this. You see, the fact that you made that comparison between the United Workers' Party and the Liberal Labour Party, this is real. And a lot of people experiencing today the fact that this Labour Party has strayed away completely from the principles and the values of the Liberal Labour Party. I know Edward Oliver LeBlanc. I know him very well. I played dominoes at his home many times in Vacaz. His son, Yot, is one of my best friends. He's in the United States now. His brother, Lipson LeBlanc, was my godfather. So I know Edward Oliver Libler, and I know what this man represented, and I know how he lived to improve the lives of. Libler did not want any poverty in Dominica. He wanted no one to be poor. And that is why when I spoke earlier, when I started my introductory remarks, I mentioned the vendors who are now struggling to just keep a location on the bayfront so they can make a living to send their children to school. That would never happen under Edward Oliver Libler. That would never happen under the United Workers' Party. So clearly, some of the values of Edward Oliver Libler's time and his regime seem to be what the same kinds of values in terms of people orientation and putting people first that the United Workers' Party is doing. The fact that we can see now so many people have to be begging and strunting and struggling and have to be wearing all kind of colors just to get a favor from a politician, that should never be the case. You don't want so much government on people's back. The government has to create an enabling environment for people to be able to prosper. That is what Libler did. That is what the United Workers' Party did, and that is why they said they were doing something everywhere, all over the country. Everybody was saying that money was coming and meet money. Right, and that
Mr. Gregoire, just to stick up in, do you remember that when the UWP sent 25 people to study medicine, what did the sitting president of Dominica at the time say? Dominica does not need so many doctors, and it was foolish to send 25 poor people children in Dominica to study medicine. That should just tell you something.
Mr. Simeon, can I also stick a pin?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I recall he's a priest right now, and I respect the cloth. But there's a particular priest who was a Calypsonian, and he had a song that says, "Workers Cafe Bagay Tupatu."
Tupatu.
Is that true?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that is a very good priest.
I think Simeon and Dion's points are so well made that we've been overtaken by a kleptocratic elite, an elite that cares about itself and its palaces, while the impoverished languish in their tarpaulin roofs and poor houses without income of the kind that he talks about. So the labor movement was about empowering others, not empowering a few. So the whole adage or the whole cliche or the whole creed of all shall eat has now been perverted into some shall eat.
Well, gentlemen, you know, when you're having a great time and things are getting interesting, the time just moves out on you, and you know you can see already it's past the hour. We are now 24 minutes after 10. We were scheduled to end by 10, but we will end at 10:30.
If I can ask Brother Sheridan, an educator par excellence, Mr. Simeon Joseph, who I had the honor of working with to revive the Dominica Cadet Corps many years ago. Simeon, what is it? Because Brother Errol and I, our mutual friend and brother, have always asked this question. What was it that motivated us in the way we were motivated back in those days? Was it because of our parenting or value engineering, the student companion, I might add, the famous student companion? Yeah. So that we had a sense of civic virtue that young people today lack. What is your observation?
Well, you see, it is and you have said something which is very poignant. Something that young people today lack. And that is why I would say, Gabriel, I am a bit frightened, or I am a bit ambivalent that we may have lost a generation. And I'm speaking about the young people who were born between 2000 and 2020. Because if you look at a lot of our young people in their 20s, 20 to 25, their main preoccupation is CO. Partying every weekend, drinking rum, twerking, going on tours around the island, not being involved in anything religious, political, social. And if they are involved in social groups, most of the social groups are socializing social groups. You speak of the National Youth Council, an institution that formed us, an institution to which we were proud of, that has suddenly become a tool over the past 15, 17 years. used by the powers that be to divide the young people of Dominica, to submerge them in a smoke screen, okay, of an opportunistic milieu that directs their attention away from things that are patriotic, things that are nationalistic, things that are creative. And so that is what we have today.
Does Dominica have a cadet program?
Yeah, I'm getting to that. And one of the things that Gabriel, I remember when I was assisting, when we were trying to bring back the Cadet Corps, this was a thriving organization in all our secondary schools. Even that too was hijacked and politicized. Being used today, we have members of the Cadet Corps who have not gone to the police training school, who are members of the police force, being donned in camouflage fatigue, involved in the very same police persecution and harassment of citizens. And I see them on videos. And so what does that tell you? That every measure of civic education has gone down the drain. Gabriel can tell you the efforts that were made in himself, Nicholas George, myself, Claudine Roberts, and so forth, even Raven Blackmore, to revive that program. The efforts that were made, the sacrifices that were made by people like Gabriel with their personal investments to revive the Cadet Corps. And then what happened again? It was politicized. It was infiltrated by elements of the powers that be, and they diverted the program to become a program that was once a tool as a support for the government, to the extent now that it has been understaffed, underfinanced, without any clear leadership, without any clear organization. And sadly enough, and I can tell you one thing, I served on the resurgence of the Cadet Corps from 1980 to 2012. And then all of a sudden, I represented the Ministry of Education on the Cadet Corps. Gabriel can tell you, making sure that they had their civic camps and their summer camps, and they went to Barbados and all of those things. And for some political reason, the Minister of Education then decided that because he thought that I should be removed from the steering committee of the Dominica Cadet Corps. Just like that. And they placed someone in the Cadet Corps who never attended an executive meeting, who had no interest in the Cadet Corps. And so the Ministry of Education participation in the Cadet Corps then became diminished. And so we saw the dismantling of the Cadet Corps in our schools. That's very sad. Very sad indeed. And so, Gabriel, we had good leaders. We had good principals. We had good teachers. We had organizations in our school, vibrant student councils. The things that were non-political, where we were taught to think independently and critically, and to have school debates.
Panel discussion.
How many times did we go to the House of Assembly upstairs in the 5th floor, be invited to sit down to listen to the debate in Parliament as student council members of the Dominica Grammar School, and sitting right there, people like Duke Williams, Errol, yourself, and I. Not everybody supported Freedom Party or Labour Party at the time, but we were invited there as students of the Dominica Grammar School and the Convent High School and Wesley High School at the time, and one or two people from the post, to become part of that civic process, to witness, to observe the functioning of government, and by extension, going back into our schools and in our communities, and sort of encouraging participation in good governance. That's what happened.
So you can't plant oranges and pick apples.
No, you can't.
Bottom line, we have to create that structure for value engineering, and this regime has miserably failed our young people.
Well, let me say this. I was a member of a cadet corps, as you know, Gabo. I went to Barbados on a camp. We learned a lot. I mean, we had to, the 303 rifle on your back. We walked all the way up to Scott's Head and back for backpack and our boots and our 303 rifles. I did that. I mean, it was good discipline for us. Right? So we had fun doing that. When we went to Barbados, there was a lot of discipline there. You had to get on the range and be shooting your 303. And of course, in the night, guys would throw your mattress outside somewhere and mush you. There were a powder and flour and so on.
Sheridan, long I know you was trained as a soldier with your 303 rifle.
Well,
the point that Sheridan is making, you don't have any cadets selling passports, you know.
Exactly.
Associated with banditti and mafiosi. You don't have it.
Yeah,
So
but
value engineering
you
is
say he had
very
his 303 rifle trade-in.
Yeah, that's what we had to do. This is a discipline that we had, right?
Wow.
And so, but gentlemen, as I said, you know, it comes to an end. I mean, I think we've done well. We've managed to get a lot of stuff in 2.5 hours, basically. I really appreciated the callers. I really appreciate the people that are on Facebook, and we're not able to take all the calls. We're not able to acknowledge all the people on Facebook, but we really thank you for being there. We appreciate you. We hope you'll join us for the next one. But I just want to give our panelists a little minute to wrap up. So, Dion, let me just give you a final word so we can wrap up.
Well, yeah, thank you,
Then I'll go to Simeon, and then I'll go to Gable.
Okay, that's fine. Well, I mean, I think the holistic picture tonight, as far as I understand, and as far as healthy as it was what sort of democracy do we want for Dominica? And I think we were able to inculcate the whole idea of the resignation of a political leader of a major party in Dominica. And we tried to look at it from a perspective of, is that good for democracy or bad? Thereabout. And so we looked at it, and I think it's good. I think the leader himself left as a statesman, and I want to say kudos to him for that. And I want to appeal to the open public to consider the transformation and the growth that lies within the opportunity here. I think some callers called, very few, and mentioned perhaps of some infighting, but we have no evidence of that. And I don't think the leader ever appealed toward that. So I think it sets a good opportunity for democracy. What I mean by that is the whole idea of having contending parties with different ideas to govern a country for the betterment of the people. So that's the first thing. The other thing I want to say, and I really want to make that point salient, is the fact that the scriptures that I read, I didn't read them for poetry reasons. I read them because I am a staunch believer that really our true leader is God himself. And so, in spite of the government in power, we know that who is in control, and the person in control always is the Almighty God. And so that's the other point. And so moving forward, we look towards building our state. We look towards building a nation, and for the betterment of all people, in spite of religious, political, and any other divide. And so, Mr. Gregoire, I think the Global View on Q brings up very good points, healthy conversations. Clearly, the panelists, I want to thank you, Mr. Gabriel Christian, Mr. Simeon Joseph, and DJ Shan. I want to thank you. Once I called and I asked you to play a song for my mom. It was by Louvin Brothers. That's my mother. And you played it for me, and I'll never forget that, because I do love my mother.
Right.
Yes, and so I want to thank you for doing that. And so I just want to say that this is a very healthy communication discussion platform that we have. I want all Dominicans to embrace it. And Mr. Gregoire, thank you for inviting me, and thanks to my colleagues. Thanks.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Gregoire.
Let me just say this, Simeon, as you come in. I just wanted to say that I know that Justice Dr. Irving Andre would have loved to have been with us here tonight. Because of his work, he could not make it tonight. I know that he probably might have been listening to some of it if he could. And really, we will bring him in the next time to engage with us further. But Simeon, it's all about moving forward, isn't it?
Definitely. And moving forward, I want to aptly say that next month, we are moving towards the celebration of our 44th anniversary of independence. And when we reflect on those 44 years, I can say that the past 20 years, sadly enough, has been a total reversal of our independence and our autonomy. And I would dare to say that we have seen a betrayal of the trust and hope that was lit in the Windsor Park on that 3rd November 1978. And it is sad to see, as a people of Dominica, what we have come to accept. We have come to accept diminished respect. We have come to expect an erosion of our autonomy. We have come to expect a compromise of our independence and our integrity. We have come to expect a dashing of the hopes of 1967 and 1978. And we have come to expect that the possibility of hope that Dominicans once held, today, 22 years of our independence, has almost seen a denigrating and a dissipating of our democracy. And so as we reflect tonight on the object of the discussion, what stimulated this discussion, I want to perhaps end by how I began and taking some example as we move forward, as we seek to have leaders of perhaps whatever political party in our country, that we look forward towards having leaders of integrity, leaders of compassion, leaders with confidence, and leaders with flexibility. And above all, leadership in a democratic system that needs statesmanship as compared to just becoming a politician, which implies possessing the honesty and the ability to stand up for what is fair, even though it means resigning from a post or losing an election. And above all, to recognize that we need political leaders with political leadership skills who will provide and prove to be successful leaders who can easily distinguish between success and failure. A successful leader who will have a visionary dream and understands how to turn visions into success stories in the modern world. And let's look at some to skills of good political leadership, of people who will communicate well with their own, have a certain level of honesty and integrity, be decisive and firm and eclectic decision makers, that they are able to inspire all, not some, and to convince them to work for the common good. And above all, be able to know when to say goodbye. I have done my duty. Let me move on, pass the baton, because Dominica does not belong to one man.
And Simeon, I thank you so much for this dynamic closing remarks here. Gabriel, Christian, I believe tonight the reason why we're here is because of the magnanimity of Lennox Linton to have done what he did, and that gave us the opportunity to engage with each other on these precious things about leadership and democracy in our wonderful little island of the Caribbean. Your final closing remarks.
My thoughts go back to my early days. I grew up with Lennox. I met Lennox in 1970 when I was 9 years old. We lived on the same street. His brother Coleridge was a cadet. It was something that was very exemplary to see Coleridge coming in from parade. His parents were teachers. They had a home full of books. They were of that generation of the student companion. Honesty is the best policy. Waste not, want not. Spare the rod, spoil the child. Make hay while the sun shines. That value engineering that we knew allowed for us in the period 67 to 77 of internal self-government to have allowed us as an associated state of Britain to have had better and more law-abiding lives. We did not live in a lawless society where people had to be imprisoned behind burglar bars. We were striving towards Black empowerment and Kalinago empowerment, full of pride and godly reverent fear. What was the national anthem that we so adored? What did it say about our character as a nation? It said to us as follows: "Come ye forward, sons and daughters of this gem beyond compare. Come ye forward, sons and daughters, do the right, be firm, be fair." Are we doing the right in Dominica? Sheridan, you're an old cadet. Simeon, I will accept him as one. Dion's father taught me as a cadet. And that is what we were inculcated. That was the value engineering. Today, we hear of ministers seeking sexual favors for scholarships. It's rampant. The rot in the police force, the favoritism. A head of the Department of Audit on the radio in partisan discussion, unable to detect the fleecing of the Treasury. The police involving itself in partisanship, a police inspector on the radio day in, day out, in violation of the general orders and the very ethic of an impartial police service. A country that has sold its birthright on the international market to bastards and mafias and mafiosi, bastardizing our nation, its very name, our very reputation, our dignity. Have we no shame, Dominicans? What independence? It's a fool's errand to say we have independence. We have been bought and sold. We do not even know if we still have a country. And so I condemn any talk of independence when we've been sold down the river, when we don't have transparency, when we don't have dignity in office, when we don't have patriotism in office, when we don't have any abiding by our constitutional norms, when we have a one-party state and a one-party philosophy, and when people are arrested because they are in opposition to the dictatorship on Dominica, when the consolidated fund is robbed of $4.2 billion that is placed outside in offshore bank accounts. And so the local banking system now is in a state of collapse because there's not enough internal industry of the kind that Simeon Joseph spoke about, of farmers coming to the bank with deposits to make. And in the absence of that local economy with which to keep banking going, the banks are disappearing. If they're not disappearing because of the anemic economy or the absence of an economy, they are disappearing because they're afraid of being sanctioned. And those sanctions can be very severe and would eviscerate their bottom line. This is the country that we say is independent. In this moment, I remember 1977 and the elocution contest on independence at the parish hall. The chief judge was no less a person than the distinguished cultural icon, Raymond Lawrence. And Raymond Lawrence said to me, "Christian, you've been very big on this independence idea, but it's not a bed of roses. And you need to bridle your enthusiasm. Look at what has happened in Uganda." What Raymond Lawrence was talking about was, in Uganda, there was a fire that had gone through the prairie by the name of Idi Amin, a dictator who had run roughshod over that country. And he was saying to me that independence is a good thing, but it's not a bed of roses. That progress is not certain, that we only make progress where we are involved in ensuring that government does right by us. Dominicans, are we involved? Are we taking our rightful place? So tonight, as I salute Lennox Linton and his family for having endured all the indignities hurled against him, I ask each and every one of you, my Dominican family, my friends, what shall be the quality of your service? Lennox has served. What shall you do? What shall we do? That is the question.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much indeed, Gabriel Christian. Gentlemen, it is I'm simply left with the duty to say it is my utmost delight to say goodnight and to say thank you to all of you on the panel, Gabriel and Simeon and Dion and DJ Shan and Sherwin, and also to all of the folks who have been with us and are still with us on Facebook, all of you on YouTube, and all of you who have been listening us on the radio in every nook and cranny, everywhere in Dominica, in region, and globally. Thank you so much for being with us. We hope we left you with something to ponder upon. But I think we have reached a moment that we can reset our democracy. And wherever we may have made a bad turn, go back there, reverse, go back there and make the right turn at that intersection. We have a chance to reset now. So, Simeon, again, gentlemen, thank you. Let me say good night to everybody. Till next time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good night.
Okay,
God
good night,
bless you.
everybody. Gibbs, Dion, good night.
Yeah, you too. DJ Shan, good job. Yebo, Sheridan. God bless.
All right, Dion. Take care.
Good night.
Yebo and Simeon. We'll talk again next time.
DJ Shan and all the rest of you. God bless you all. It has been an honor and privilege to serve.
Can we
And,
play Levy
Simeon-
Dominic by Spags John? Levy
Oh,
Dominic,
okay.
Levy.
Well, maybe if Sean can find that for us, maybe he can play that for us as we make our exit. Take care, gentlemen.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Looking out my window, and I'm a thinking of tomorrow, and I'm a wondering what the future will be.